My rescue cat Oliver scratched my face deep enough to leave scars, hissing like I was his worst enemy. I kissed his head anyway, trying to calm him down. 3 days later, my doctor called in absolute panic. "Rachel, everyone who's had close contact with Oliver is dead or dying." When I asked what was happening, she whispered something that still haunts me. "His saliva contains a mutated strain of something we've never seen before." I'm Rachel Torres, and this is the story of how my cat turned out to be a walking biological weapon. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. He was desperately trying to save us all, and I was the only person who could help him do it. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button right now, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you need to hear how this ends, because what Oliver was really doing will blow your mind. That morning when Oliver attacked me, I thought I was dealing with a sick cat. What I didn't know was that 3 families before me had already lost loved ones to this same gray cat, and my name was about to be added to a list of victims that the CDC was secretly tracking. Let me start from the beginning. 6 weeks before that terrible morning, I walked into Riverside Animal Shelter looking for a companion. I'd been working as a veterinary technician for 5 years, and I figured it was time to have a pet of my own. The shelter was full of the usual cats you'd expect. Tabbies, black cats, orange ones. But in the very last cage, separated from all the others, sat Oliver. He was beautiful in an unusual way. Silver gray fur that seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights, and green eyes that watched me with an intelligence that made me stop in my tracks. The sign on his cage had more warning labels than any animal I'd ever seen. Special needs, experienced owner required, must sign additional waivers. Mrs. Gonzalez, the shelter director, actually tried to walk me away from his cage. "Rachel, I know you're experienced, but this one is different. He's been returned 3 times in 2 months. The last family, they just dropped him off and practically ran out the door." That should have been my first warning sign, but I was confident. Maybe too confident. "What's his story?" I asked, already knowing I was going to take him home. "Police found him during a raid on some laboratory called Nexus Labs. The place was shut down for illegal animal testing. We don't know what they did to him, but he's not like other cats." She lowered her voice. "The Henderson family who had him first, their daughter got really sick after he scratched her. They blamed Oliver, but you know how people are. They always want someone to blame." I filled out the paperwork that day, signed 3 different liability waivers, and took Oliver home in a carrier that he seemed way too calm in. Most cats cry during car rides. Oliver just watched me through the bars, studying my every move. The first month was perfect. Actually, beyond perfect. Oliver was the smartest cat I'd ever met. He learned to open doorknobs within 3 days. He figured out how to turn on the kitchen faucet when he wanted fresh water. He even seemed to understand when I talked to him, tilting his head like he was processing every word. My sister Daniela fell in love with him immediately. "This cat is basically human," she said during one of her visits. "Look at how he watches TV. He's actually following the plot." We laughed about it, but she wasn't wrong. Oliver would sit through entire movies, his eyes tracking the action on screen. My boyfriend Marcus was less enthusiastic. "There's something weird about that cat," he'd say. "The way he stares at me, it's like he's examining me." But even Marcus had to admit Oliver was special when the cat learned to bring me my phone whenever it rang. The neighborhood kids were obsessed with him, especially little Lily from next door, an 8-year-old girl who wanted to be a vet just like me. Her mother would let her come over after school, and she'd spend hours playing with Oliver. He was gentle with her, patient in a way that seemed almost parental. My mother met Oliver during our regular Sunday dinners. "This cat has an old soul," she said, stroking his silver fur. "Look at his eyes. He's been through something." She had no idea how right she was. Everything was perfect for exactly 5 weeks and 4 days. Then came that Thursday morning. I was running late for work, rushing through Oliver's morning routine. I'd just opened a can of his favorite food when he suddenly launched himself at my face. No warning, no hissing beforehand, just pure violence that left 4 deep parallel scratches from my temple to my jaw. I screamed and stumbled backward, blood dripping onto my scrubs. Oliver landed on the counter and immediately cowered, his whole body shaking. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, it was terror, pure, absolute terror, like he'd just done something he desperately didn't want to do. "Oliver, what's wrong?" I said, reaching out despite the burning pain in my face. He hissed and backed away, but I could see he was trembling. This wasn't normal aggression. This was something else entirely. I did what I always did when Oliver was upset. I picked him up gently, even as he tried to squirm away, and kissed the top of his head. "It's okay, baby. I'm not mad. You're scared, aren't you? What are you so afraid of?" He went completely still in my arms. Then he did something I'd never seen any cat do. He pressed his paw against my bleeding cheek gently, like he was trying to examine the wounds. When he pulled his paw back, it was covered in my blood, and he stared at it with an expression I can only describe as calculating. I cleaned my wounds, applied antibiotic ointment, and went to work anyway. It was just cat scratches, I thought. I'd been scratched hundreds of times in my career. But as I drove to the clinic that morning, I kept thinking about the look in Oliver's eyes. That wasn't the look of an aggressive cat. That was the look of someone who'd just made a terrible mistake. 3 days later, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My lymph nodes were so swollen I could barely turn my head. The scratches on my face, which should have been healing, were red and inflamed, and I had a fever of 103 degrees that came out of nowhere. I called in sick to work, figuring I'd caught cat scratch fever. It happens sometimes in our profession. But when I told my colleague which cat had scratched me, she went completely quiet on the phone. "Rachel, please tell me you didn't adopt that gray cat from Riverside, the one from the laboratory raid." My stomach dropped. "Why? What's wrong?" "Call Dr. Reeves immediately. Don't wait. 3 people who fostered that cat are in the ICU right now. The CDC is involved. Rachel, that cat is carrying something nobody's ever seen before." 3 days after Oliver scratched me, I was lying in bed with the worst fever of my life when my phone started ringing nonstop. First, it was my colleague from the veterinary clinic calling back, her voice shaking, as she told me that the CDC had just contacted them looking for anyone who'd been in contact with a gray cat from the Nexus Labs raid. Then my sister Daniela called, saying she'd seen something on the local news about a mysterious illness linked to adopted shelter animals. But the call that changed everything came from Dr. Patricia Reeves, my physician since I was 12 years old. "Rachel, don't panic, but I need you to answer my questions very carefully," Patricia said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Have you had any contact with a gray cat named Oliver from Riverside Animal Shelter?" When I confirmed that Oliver was currently sleeping at the foot of my bed, she took a sharp breath. "I need you to list every single person who has touched, held, or been near that cat. Every single one." My mind raced as I started listing names. Daniela had kissed Oliver on the head just 2 days ago, when she stopped by to borrow my laptop. Marcus had been cat-sitting last week while I worked a double shift, and he'd sent me videos of Oliver sitting on his chest. My mother had held Oliver during last Sunday's dinner, cooing over him like he was her grandchild. And then there was Lily, sweet little Lily from next door, who'd snuck into my apartment just yesterday when I was getting mail because she wanted to show Oliver her new toy mouse. "Patricia, what's happening? Why do you need to know this?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I started connecting the dots. The Henderson family that Mrs. Gonzalez had mentioned, their daughter getting sick, Oliver being returned 3 times, and now the CDC being involved. This wasn't just cat scratch fever. Patricia's next words confirmed my worst fears. "Rachel, I'm at the hospital right now with the Henderson family. Their 17-year-old daughter Sarah died yesterday. The autopsy showed a completely unknown pathogen that appears to be transmitted through feline saliva. It's similar to rabies but moves faster and seems to specifically target the human nervous system. The Martinez family, who had Oliver before you, their 10-year-old son is on life support." I sat up so fast that Oliver jumped off the bed, startled. "Patricia, he scratched my face 3 days ago. Deep scratches. And I kissed him right after because he seemed scared. His saliva definitely got into the wounds. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Get to the hospital immediately. Bring Oliver in a secure carrier and don't let anyone else touch him. I'm calling the CDC response team now. Rachel, this is important. Do you have contact information for everyone on that list you just gave me? My hands were shaking as I got dressed, trying not to look at Oliver, who was now sitting in the doorway watching me with those unnaturally intelligent green eyes. As I pulled on my jacket, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Feeling really sick, fever and swollen glands. Didn't want to worry you but going to urgent care. Then another from Daniela. Mom just called. She collapsed at work. They're taking her to regional medical. The weight of what was happening crashed down on me. Everyone I loved, everyone who'd touched Oliver, was getting sick. And according to Patricia, people were dying. I looked at Oliver, who hadn't moved from the doorway, and noticed something that made my blood run cold. He was watching me with what looked like guilt. Not the blank stare cats usually have, but actual, human-like guilt. I managed to get Oliver into his carrier, though he didn't fight me like I expected. He went in willingly, almost resignedly, like he knew what was coming. During the drive to the hospital, I made call after call. Marcus's phone went straight to voicemail. Daniela was already at the hospital with our mother. Lily's mother answered on the first ring, and when I told her to take Lily to the emergency room immediately, she started crying. She woke up with a fever this morning, she said. I thought it was just the flu. She kept asking for Oliver, saying she needed to tell him something important. Rachel, what's happening? What's wrong with your cat? I couldn't answer her because I didn't know. All I knew was that Oliver had been carrying something deadly, and I'd let him into my life, into the lives of everyone I cared about. The 15-minute drive to the hospital felt like 15 hours, with Oliver silent in his carrier, and my phone continuing to buzz, with increasingly panicked messages from friends and family. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot, there were 3 CDC vans already there, their white surfaces gleaming under the afternoon sun. People in hazmat suits were setting up what looked like a portable laboratory. As soon as I parked, 2 suited figures approached my car, one holding a specialized carrier designed for biohazard containment. Through the plastic face shield, I recognized Dr. James Park from a veterinary conference I'd attended last year. He was one of the leading experts in zoonotic diseases, and if he was here personally, this was worse than I'd imagined. The isolation ward at Regional Medical Center became my entire world within minutes of arrival. They put me in a negative pressure room with thick glass windows, the kind they use for the most dangerous infectious diseases. Through the glass, I could see the chaos unfolding as more and more people were brought in. Dr. Patricia Reeves stood outside my room in full protective gear, explaining through the intercom system what they'd discovered so far about Oliver and the virus he carried. The laboratory that was raided, Nexus Labs, was conducting illegal experiments on zoonotic disease transmission, Patricia said, holding up a tablet showing documents with redacted sections. They were trying to understand how viruses jump from animals to humans, but Oliver wasn't just a test subject. They modified him genetically, Rachel. His brain shows abnormal development in areas associated with problem-solving and pattern recognition. They created something that shouldn't exist. Dr. James Park joined her at the window, and even through his hazmat suit, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. We've traced 47 people who've had direct contact with Oliver in the past 6 weeks. 19 are already showing symptoms. The incubation period seems to be between 48 and 72 hours after exposure. You're at hour 76 now, which means whatever happens in the next few hours will determine if you survive this. Through another window, I could see Oliver in his containment unit, sitting perfectly still while scientists in hazmat suits took samples. He wasn't fighting them or showing any signs of the aggression that cats usually display when scared. He was just watching everything with those unsettling green eyes, like he was studying their every move. What exactly is the virus? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. It's a modified feline coronavirus that's been engineered to cross species barriers, Dr. Park explained. But here's what doesn't make sense. The virus in Oliver's system is actually relatively weak. It shouldn't be killing people this quickly. Something else is happening here. Something we're missing. He paused, looking at his tablet. Your blood work is showing something interesting, though. You have antibodies we're not seeing in other patients. That's when I remembered something that felt important. When I was 16, I nearly died from severe cat scratch fever. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Could that be why I'm not as sick as the others? Dr. Park's eyes widened behind his face shield, and he immediately started typing on his tablet, pulling up medical records from 15 years ago. While they analyzed my blood work, I made a decision that would change everything. If I have antibodies that others don't, use my blood, take as much as you need, create a treatment from it. I looked through the glass at my mother being wheeled past on a gurney, an oxygen mask covering her face. Save my family first. I don't care what happens to me, just save them. Dr. Park shook his head. It's not that simple. We need to understand why you have these antibodies and why Oliver specifically chose you, because that's another thing we've discovered. Oliver didn't randomly end up with those 4 families. He escaped from each home deliberately, always returning to the shelter until he found you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He chose me? How is that possible? But even as I asked, I thought about all the strange things Oliver had done, the way he'd watch me, the way he'd learned my routines, the way he'd seemed to understand everything I said. This wasn't just a smart cat. This was something else entirely. We need to try something unconventional, Dr. Park said after conferring with his team. We want to put Oliver in the room with you, under controlled conditions. We've noticed his vital signs spike whenever you're mentioned or when he hears your voice through the monitoring system. He's showing signs of distress that seem connected to your condition. It sounded insane, putting me in direct contact with the source of the infection, but I agreed. We were running out of time. Lily had been moved to pediatric intensive care, her small body struggling against the virus. Marcus was on a ventilator. My mother's kidneys were starting to fail. If Oliver held some key to understanding this disease, we needed to figure it out now. They brought Oliver in using a specialized containment corridor, placing his carrier in my room, while scientists watched through cameras and windows. The moment they opened the carrier door, Oliver did something that made everyone gasp. He walked directly to me, sat down, and placed one paw on my hand. Then he looked directly at the observation window and meowed once, sharp and clear. Dr. Park's voice came through the intercom, shaking with disbelief. Rachel. His brain activity just spiked in regions associated with complex communication. I think he's trying to tell us something. I looked down at Oliver, his green eyes meeting mine, and suddenly understood that this cat wasn't our enemy. He was trying to be our salvation. What are you trying to tell us, Oliver? I whispered, and he pressed his paw harder against my hand, right where the IV line was inserting antibodies back into my system. That's when Dr. Park shouted through the intercom, "Oh my God, he's been inoculating you. The scratches weren't attacks. He's been giving you controlled exposure to build immunity." Dr. Park burst through the airlock 20 minutes later, still in his hazmat suit but moving with an urgency I hadn't seen before. He was carrying a laptop that showed brain scans, blood work comparisons, and what looked like security footage from the shelter. Rachel, we figured it out, and it's incredible and terrifying at the same time. Oliver isn't just a carrier of this virus. He's been actively trying to create a cure using human subjects. The words didn't make sense at first. How could a cat, even a genetically modified one, understand concepts like immunity and vaccination? But Dr. Park pulled up a series of videos on his laptop that changed everything. The first showed Oliver at the Henderson house, deliberately scratching their daughter Sarah in specific patterns, always on her arms, always superficial. The second showed him with the Martinez family, doing the same thing to their son. But the third video, from my apartment's security camera that I'd installed to watch him while at work, showed something completely different. "Look at this," Dr. Park said, zooming in on footage from 3 weeks ago. "See how he scratches you here? It's different from the others. Lighter, more controlled. Then watch this." The video showed Oliver bringing me dead insects, something I thought was just typical cat behavior. But when Dr. Park enhanced the image, we could see Oliver had been specifically choosing certain types of bugs, ones that carried mild pathogens. He was training your immune system gradually, building it up to handle the virus. Patricia pulled up my medical history alongside the other victims. Your severe cat scratch fever at 16 changed your immune system permanently. You developed antibodies that most people never create. Oliver could smell these markers on you. The Nexus Labs modifications gave him the ability to detect immune system responses through scent. That's why he kept returning to the shelter. He was looking for someone with the right biological makeup to survive and create antibodies. But the most shocking revelation came when they analyzed the pattern of Oliver's behavior with each family. He had given them increasingly stronger doses of the virus, learning from each failure. Sarah Henderson had received too much too fast. The Martinez boy had gotten a more measured dose, but still couldn't handle it. By the time Oliver reached me, he'd perfected his technique. The shallow scratches he'd been giving me over 5 weeks were precisely calculated to build immunity without triggering severe illness. But why the deep scratches 3 days ago? I asked, looking at Oliver, who was now pressing both paws against the glass window, watching the monitors showing my family's vital signs. Dr. Park pulled up another document, this one from Nexus Labs' seized records. According to this, they programmed a biological timer into Oliver's DNA. After 6 weeks with a host, if successful antibody production hasn't occurred, he's compelled to deliver a massive dose to accelerate the process. He literally couldn't stop himself from scratching you that morning. The weight of this revelation was staggering. Oliver had been fighting against his own programming, trying to control something that was hardwired into his modified genes. That's why he'd looked terrified after scratching me. He knew he might have just killed the one person who could help create a cure. The kiss, I whispered, remembering how I'd kissed his head after the attack. He let me kiss him even though he was terrified. He wanted me to get more exposure to the virus. Dr. Park nodded, pulling up real-time brain scans of Oliver. Look at his neural activity when we show him pictures of the sick patients. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree, especially in areas associated with distress and problem-solving. Now watch when we show him your improving blood work. Different areas activated, ones associated with satisfaction and goal completion. He understands what's happening. He knows people are dying, and he knows you're the solution. The scientists had been working around the clock to synthesize antibodies from my blood, but the process was too slow. People were getting sicker by the hour. That's when Oliver did something that stunned everyone watching. He walked to the corner of the room where they'd placed his food and water, knocked over the water bowl deliberately, and used his paw to draw a pattern in the spilled water. It looked random at first, but Dr. Park gasped when he saw it. That's the molecular structure of the protein we've been trying to isolate. He's showing us which specific antibody works. It seemed impossible, but when they compared Oliver's water drawing to the protein structures in my blood, one matched perfectly. They'd been looking at dozens of different antibodies, but Oliver had identified the exact one that neutralized the virus. How does he know this? Patricia asked, but Dr. Park was already pulling up more Nexus Labs documents. They didn't just modify his intelligence, they gave him inherent knowledge of biochemistry related to the virus. He's not learning this. He knows it the same way we know how to breathe. The lab technicians immediately began synthesizing the specific antibody Oliver had identified, and within 2 hours, they had enough for initial treatment. The first dose went to Lily, whose condition was the most critical. Within 30 minutes, her fever began dropping. Her oxygen levels improved. She opened her eyes and asked for her mother. One by one, they administered the treatment to all the patients, and one by one, they began recovering. Oliver sat perfectly still through it all, watching the monitors, his tail twitching only when someone's vital signs improved. The recovery took 3 weeks for most patients, but everyone survived. Every single person who'd been exposed to Oliver's virus pulled through, thanks to the antiviral developed from my blood and Oliver's extraordinary guidance. Lily was released after 5 days, running straight to Oliver's containment area to press her small hands against the glass. I knew you were trying to help, she whispered to him, and Oliver placed his paw where her hand was, purring for the first time since this nightmare began. Marcus needed 2 weeks of treatment, but made a full recovery, though he still jokes that he'll never cat-sit again. My mother spent 3 weeks in the hospital, her kidneys slowly healing, but she now calls Oliver her grand cat and brings him special treats every Sunday. The CDC investigation into Nexus Labs revealed something even more disturbing than we'd initially thought. The facility had been creating multiple modified animals, not just Oliver. They'd been trying to develop biological weapons that could target specific populations based on genetic markers. Oliver was meant to be a prototype for controlled disease transmission, but something had gone wrong with his programming, or maybe something had gone right. The enhanced intelligence they'd given him had developed beyond their parameters. He'd developed what could only be described as a conscience, an understanding that his purpose was wrong, and he'd found a way to subvert it. Dr. James Park published a groundbreaking paper about Oliver's case 6 months later, revolutionizing how we think about animal intelligence and disease transmission. Oliver demonstrated problem-solving abilities that challenge our entire understanding of animal cognition, he wrote. He performed selective immunization, tracked antibody responses, and even communicated complex molecular structures. This wasn't instinct. This was deliberate, calculated medical intervention by a non-human subject. The paper won him a Nobel Prize nomination, though he always credits Oliver as his co-author in speeches. Oliver now lives in a specially designed facility that's part research lab, part luxury cat hotel. I visit him every single day, and we've developed a communication system using tablets and touchscreens. He can select images to convey basic concepts, and he's learning to use symbols to create simple sentences. His first successfully communicated phrase, after months of training, was, "Sorry hurt you." When I showed him a picture of all the recovered patients together at a celebration dinner, he selected symbols that translated to good, fixed, happy. The researchers cried. I definitely cried. The Hendersons, who lost their daughter Sarah, visited Oliver last month. I was terrified of what they might say or do, but Sarah's mother, Linda, just sat quietly in front of his enclosure for a long time. Finally, she spoke to him. Sarah wanted to be a veterinarian. She would have been fascinated by you. She would have understood that you were trying to help. Oliver came to the glass and sat down, maintaining eye contact with her in a way that felt deeply human. Linda visits him every week now, reading him stories that Sarah had written about. Animals. The legal ramifications were massive. 17 Nexus Labs executives and scientists were convicted of bioterrorism and illegal genetic experimentation. The facility's research was destroyed, except for the data needed to treat victims and understand what had been done to Oliver. 3 other modified animals were found and are now in specialized care facilities, though none showed Oliver's level of consciousness. A new law was passed, called Oliver's Law, strictly regulating genetic modification of animals and requiring extensive ethical oversight. The antiviral developed from my blood, and Oliver's guidance has saved over 3,000 lives in the past year. A natural outbreak of a similar feline coronavirus occurred in Southeast Asia 8 months after our incident, and the treatment protocol we'd developed stopped it from becoming a pandemic. The WHO credits Oliver with preventing potentially millions of deaths. They even issued him an honorary certificate of service to humanity, which hangs in his enclosure next to pictures visitors send of their recovered pets and family members. My life has changed completely. I left my veterinary technician job to work full-time at Oliver's facility, helping to care for him and study his remarkable abilities. I'm also part of a team developing new protocols for identifying and treating zoonotic diseases. Every morning, I start my day sitting with Oliver, who now has a 2-room enclosure with windows overlooking a garden. He still can't be allowed physical contact with anyone except me, and even then, only under strict protocols. But he seems content, spending his days solving puzzles, painting with special paw-safe paints, and watching the birds outside. If you've made it this far in our story, please hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, And if you've ever had a pet who seemed to understand more than they should, because Oliver taught us something crucial about the animals in our lives. They're not just pets or possessions. They're beings with their own intelligence, their own purposes, and sometimes their own desperate attempts to save us from dangers we don't even know exist. Last week, Oliver did something new. Using his tablet, he created a message that took everyone by surprise. He selected symbols that said, "Want, teach others, help more." We're now working on a program where Oliver can help train detection dogs to identify various diseases. The first dog, a German Shepherd named Hope, starts next month. Oliver watched her through the glass during her initial visit, and for the first time since I've known him, his tail stood straight up with excitement. He's found a new purpose, one that doesn't require him to hurt anyone to help them. The story should have ended tragically. A biological weapon, innocent victims, families destroyed. Instead, it became a story of redemption, of an unwilling weapon who chose to become a cure. Oliver saved us all, not through his virus, but through his determination to find someone who could help him fix what his creators had broken. He chose me not because I was special, but because I was possible. And together, we turned a nightmare into a miracle. That's the power of connection between humans and animals, even when one of them has been engineered to be a killer. Love and intelligence found a way, and 47 people are alive today because a cat refused to be the weapon he was designed to be.